We are on to, sorry, I have to look. And of course it doesn't tell me. There it is, chapter 6, which is new spirituality. And Guy's gonna listen to us. That's his butt. I don't know. Can you see him? There's his head. He likes these chapters. Okie dokie. Here we go. Section 1 about new spirituality. Aruna's heart pounded with anxiety as the chariot clattered onto the battlefield of Karu. The horses snorted and tried to bolt, held back only by the expert guidance of Aruna's chariot driver, Krishna. "Stop here," commanded Aruna uncertainly. There, in the middle of the battlefield, he could see what was about to unfold. On one side, the Pandavas, Aruna's kin and followers, prepared their weapons for slaughter. On the other side, the troops of the Kaurava clan moved into formation. The Kauravas were his cousins, but today they were the enemy. As soon as the battle began, Aruna knew he would destroy them without mercy. Or would he? His heart pounding, his breath coming in gasps, 1,000 thoughts filled Aruna's head. He felt pity for those he would kill and dread that the battle might turn and his life might end today. "I cannot fight," he thought. "I have no will." Aruna watched as Krishna spoke reassuringly to the nervous steeds shivering in the rising light. At last he spoke. "I am weighed down by pity, Krishna. My mind is utterly confused," he confessed. "Tell me where my duty lies, which path I should take." Krishna sighed and turned his gaze away from the enemy formations directly toward Aruna's eyes. "Wise men do not grieve for the dead or for the living," he said simply. "What are you saying?" asked Aruna, startled. Krishna replied matter-of-factly, "These bodies come to an end, but that vast embodied self is ageless, fathomless, eternal." Aruna stared at Krishna, and suddenly he knew this was no chariot driver. He was peering into the eyes of a god who had come down to steady Aruna's nerves for what he must do. All the secrets of the universe were in the mind of this god-man holding the reins. It was a battle for a kingdom. It was also a battle for the warrior's tormented mind. Tentatively, Aruna broke away from Krishna's gaze and surveyed the enemy lines. "The mind is restless, unsteady, turbulent, wild, and stubborn," he said, slowly choosing words as carefully as he knew how. "Truly, it seems to me as hard to master as the wind." Krishna did not reply for a long time. "You are right, Aruna," he said at last. "The mind is restless and hard to master, but by constant practice and detachment, it can be mastered in the end." I feel like music needs to start now. Section 2. The modern search for mystery. Aruna and Krishna's conversation comprises an epic poem, the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of the Blessed One, written perhaps more than 2,000 years ago, and to this day a treasured stanza of the Mahabharata, India's national epic poem. Like many famous poems, the Bhagavad Gita is more than metered verse. It is a code, a set of carefully chosen words placed thoughtfully on the page so as to jar loose the reader's imagination and communicate what those who believe in it consider to be a deep, persuasive reality. For thousands of years, Hindus have studied the narrative of Aruna and Krishna as a source of truth, not only about the unseen universe, but also about the duty of man. It is a vision of what actually exists, an eternal, non-personal, encompassing all, the self standing in stark contrast to the individualistic, autonomous self at the heart of the secular vision of the world. But the message of the Bhagavad Gita is not just a Hindu vision. Today, its description of reality weaves loosely a pattern of ideas, beliefs, values, and convictions held by millions of Americans, most of whom have no historical connection to the long-held religious traditions undergirding their own playfully held creeds. Whether frivolously or seriously, almost everyone searches for meaning. Unfortunately, the answers religion and science offer often seem unsatisfactory. In this chapter, we will explore an ancient worldview masquerading as a new path for meaning on which the human race can travel to achieve true enlightenment. We call this worldview New Spirituality. On the one hand, New Spirituality is hard to define because it lacks a definitive core of belief. Christians believe in the death and resurrection of Jesus. Secularists trust the scientific method. Marxists think feeding resentment about capitalism will lead to the truth. Muslims consider the creed of Islam worth living and dying for. Postmodernists, who pride themselves on rejecting all other meta-narratives, seem to think suspicion is a sufficiently large frame in which to hang other beliefs. So what do New Spiritualists believe is a sufficient source of hope that both explains the world and forms the basis of the good life? Section 3. Everything is spiritual. Deepak Chopra, a self-proclaimed spiritual leader, thinks the problems we face in our world are primarily spiritual. On this point, Christians would agree. 2 Corinthians 10:4 says the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. In fact, Christians might even find Chopra's framing of our spiritual problems compelling. He says all around us people ache with emptiness and yearning. There's a vacuum to be filled, and it's a spiritual vacuum. What other word really fits? Only when people are given hope that this ache can be healed will we truly know what the future holds. Let science join in the cure, because otherwise we may wind up with marvels of technology serving empty hearts and abandoned souls. What is the healing hope of which Chopra speaks? For a growing number of spiritual teachers, business consultants, best-selling authors, and television hosts, hope springs from rejecting traditional religion and embracing our divinity, power, and godlikeness. Only this will give us meaning. Only this will enable us to change the world. As Rhonda Byrne claimed in her mega bestseller, The Secret means that we are creators of our universe and that every wish that we want to create will manifest in our lives. What we call New Spirituality is often referred to as the New Age movement, Transcendentalism, Neo-Paganism, New Consciousness, or just spirituality. Previous editions of Understanding the Times use the term cosmic humanism. Ken Wilber, a prolific author in the field, uses the term the integral vision to describe his efforts to create a composite map of understanding based on insights from all of the world's cultures and traditions. As this particular worldview has changed in the last 20 years, though, we think the term New Spirituality best explains the way its answers to life's ultimate questions have captured the imagination of tens of millions of Americans. New Spirituality is based on a radically different vision of the world, of the nature and character of God, and of the purpose of human beings in this world and the next from the vision of traditional religions. Yet it often confuses Christians because of frequent positive references to God and Jesus Christ. The growth of New Spirituality in the last several decades has resulted in many people being taken captive by its ideas. As thinking Christians, we must understand where it comes from, what answers it proposes to the mysteries of life, and how it frames a view of the world unique from the other worldviews considered in this book. Proverbs 15:28 says, "The heart of the righteous ponders how to answer." So let's get started doing just that. Section 4. Where does it come from and why should we care? Fans of the science fiction film The Matrix will recall a memorable scene of Neo watching a boy in Buddhist robes sitting cross-legged on the floor, bending metal spoons simply by staring at them. The boy explains to Neo, "Don't try to bend the spoon. That's impossible. Instead, only try to realize the truth. There is no spoon." The boy's statement reflects a view of reality utterly at odds with Western thought. The physical world we perceive is an illusion where nothing is objective except our own mental states. Larry and Andy Wachowski wanted to play on this view of the world while writing and directing The Matrix. One of the things that we had talked about when we first had the idea of The Matrix was an idea that we believe philosophy and religion and mathematics all try to answer, a reconciling between natural world and another world that is perceived by our intellect. These thoughts are not new, of course. Among the forefathers of contemporary New Spirituality are poets and writers from the 1800s such as Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. These men rejected the God of the Bible and instead wrote at length about a transcendent quality of spirituality experienced purely through personal introspection. This idea, known as transcendentalism, saw human beings and nature as inherently good, but corrupted by society. Institutions such as organized religion and politics, for example, participated in this corruption. This idea will be explored more fully in the sociology chapter of this volume. Transcendentalism gained more traction through the writings of Emily Dickinson and Walt Whitman, as well as the self-help teachings of Mary Baker Eddy, Wallace Wattles, and Napoleon Hill. In the 1960s, this new thought morphed into a syncretistic worldview, a merging of Eastern religion with pop psychology, self-help teaching, meditation, and health and wealth doctrines designed to answer life's most pressing questions. One of the early chroniclers of New Spirituality's development was Marilyn Ferguson, author of a 1980s volume called The Aquarian Conspiracy. Ferguson detailed the unexpected confluence of Eastern spiritual influences and fringe science that launched the careers of 1,000 spiritual teachers, including Deepak Chopra. The book is said to have deeply inspired politician and futurist Al Gore. Translated into 16 languages and spawning dozens of copycat books, The Aquarian Conspiracy was clearly onto something. New spirituality exploded in the 1990s and found wide dissemination through movies, television, and book sales. The Celestine Prophecy, published in 1993, sold over 8 million copies in more than 32 countries, achieving distinction as the best-selling American hardcover book for 2 consecutive years. Author James Redfield wrote in the 1997 afterword, "We are manifesting nothing less than a new worldview that will flourish in the next millennium." Another modern-day spiritual messenger was Neale Donald Walsch, the author of 15 books on spirituality and everyday life. His first 5 books in the Conversations with God series all made the New York Times bestseller list, with the first book remaining on the list for more than 2 years. His books have been translated into 27 languages, selling more than 7 million copies worldwide. But the popularity of New Spirituality had not yet reached its apex. Rhonda Byrne's The Secret became an international sensation after its release in 2006, selling 19 million copies and being translated into 46 languages. The Secret offered its worldview to a popular audience on the scale of The Purpose-Driven Life by Christian pastor and author Rick Warren. New spirituality feeds off popular dissatisfaction with organized religion. Deepak Chopra, whose books and television appearances have made him a household name to hundreds of millions of people around the world, claims that science has advanced to the point where religion has been revealed as nothing more than primitive superstition. Religion cannot resolve this dilemma of the human condition. It has had its chances already, but spirituality can, he claims. We need to go back to the source of religion. That source isn't God, it's consciousness. However, even a worldview that shuns identifiable religious traditions might itself be religious. Remember, a religion is a set of beliefs about the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe. Advocates of new spirituality, therefore, are, without question, religious. Weary of religious conflict and dogmatism, more and more people find a spirituality stripped of religious dogma attractive. And spirituality sounds freeing and accepting. Religion, on the other hand, seems judgmental and boring. It's common to hear, "I'm spiritual but not religious." To those raised in religious households, this sounds like a distinction without a difference. However, to Robert C. Fuller, professor of religious studies at Bradley University, the difference is very real. Most people loosely define spirituality as a private realm of thought and expression, says Fuller, whereas religion focuses on the public realm of institutions, rituals, and doctrines. Around 20% of Americans claim the spiritual but not religious designation and show higher levels of interest in mysticism, while holding a negative feeling toward both clergy and churches. Spirituality enables people to be interested in what lies beyond without having to grasp finely textured doctrines or apologize for the historical abuses people associated with their tradition have carried out. Even among would-be secularists, spirituality is cool. When spirituality is considered an active search for meaning and purpose in life, or as an interest in self-awareness and enlightenment, even 81% of college professors consider themselves spiritual, according to a study by UCLA. Is this growing interest a scattershot phenomenon, with each adherent developing his or her own beliefs, or is new spirituality a truly identifiable and widespread worldview? Let's see if we can answer these questions by taking a look at new spirituality's teachings. Section 5. What does it teach? No worldview exists in which adherents agree on everything. However, their shared agreement on fundamental issues provides ways we can predict what advocates would believe and teach in such disciplines as theology, philosophy, and ethics. While there are minor differences in the teachings of new spirituality advocates such as Deepak Chopra, Eckhart Tolle, Rhonda Byrne, the Dalai Lama, and others, they seem to adhere to 4 basic beliefs. The first belief: everything is consciousness. Eckhart Tolle is one of the world's most popular spiritual teachers. His books have sold tens of millions of copies. In a 2011 list of the top 100 spiritual teachers in the world, Tolle was listed as number 1. The whole is made up of existence and being, the manifested and the unmanifested, the whole and God, says Tolle. So when you become aligned with the whole, you become a conscious part of the interconnectedness of the whole and its purpose, the emergence of consciousness into this world. Those accustomed to thinking of the world as being populated with objects and people as identifiable individuals who think in personal pronouns of I or me, have a difficult time understanding where new spirituality advocates are coming from. For many, the introduction to the idea of consciousness, energy, being, and related concepts was not through self-help books, but through George Lucas's now classic film series, Star Wars. With Star Wars, I consciously set about to recreate myths and the classic mythological motifs, said Lucas. I wanted to use those motifs to deal with issues that exist today. I see Star Wars as taking all the issues that religion represents and trying to distill them down into a more modern and easily accessible construct. I'm telling an old myth in a new way. When Lucas's characters feel the Force, they're not sensing the power of the Holy Spirit. In describing the Force to Luke Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi said, "Well, the Force is what gives a Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together." This could also serve as a good description of the idea of consciousness Tolle and others embrace, and it seems Lucas was mindful of this connection and interested in promoting it. I've always tried to be aware of what I say in my films because all of us who make motion pictures are teachers, Lucas says, teachers with very loud voices. Consciousness is usually defined in vague terms. Deepak Chopra, however, lists the following qualities of pure consciousness: silent and peaceful, self-sufficient, awake, possessing infinite potential, self-organizing, spontaneous, dynamic, blissful, knowing, and whole. How Chopra knows this is unclear. It leads to as many questions as it answers. For example, many of the qualities Chopra lists are personal, the sorts of attributes a person rather than a mindless force would possess. If consciousness is personal, it would actually describe a sort of God. In the end, though, Chopra and others see consciousness as an impersonal force. What makes an impersonal force personal? According to New Spirituality advocates, the answer is you and me. To New Spiritualists, God is personal only in that our God experiences are subjective and personal. The Bible teaches something entirely different about God's nature and character. In Exodus 3:14, God said to Moses, "I am who I am." In other words, I am complete in and of myself. It's a clear statement of self-determination. The Apostle Paul further affirmed God's self-existence in his speech to a religious society in Athens. He said, "The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything." God is, as Christian philosopher Francis Schaeffer phrased it, infinite personal. This teaching has no part in New Spiritualist thinking. If everything is collective consciousness, then ultimately everything is God. This brings us to the second core of New Spiritualist belief. Every person is God. According to New Spiritualists, all is consciousness. Human beings, like all things, are part of this consciousness. We are not individuals in the normal Western sense of the term. This aspect of New Spirituality has a long tradition among a particular group of Buddhists called Middle Way Consequentialists. Middle Way Consequentialists, who include the the revered Tibetan or Tibetan, he's from Tibet, Tibetan, we're going with that, actually constitutes, Middle Way Consequentialists, who include the revered Tibetan Buddhist Dalai Lama, reject the existence of objective reality. What about a chair, for example? What about a chair, for example, actually constitutes chairness? If we look at its individual parts, no chair is there. The chair isn't in the wood or in the varnish or even in the shape. The quality of chairness is a mental construction. This particular school of Buddhism applies this way of thinking to human beings. The Dalai Lama says, just as there is no chair to be found among its parts, and no rose to be found among its petals, so there is no person to be found among its constituent aspect of body and mind. He continues on. Each of the physical and mental parts of which I am composed is similarly empty of any identifiable existence. Our initial reaction to recognizing that things do not possess objective or inherent existence is understandably one of surprise. We are discovering that the actual way things exist is so very contrary to how we naturally relate to them. This way of thinking only makes sense if we view consciousness as what is actually real, and objects and people are separate and distinct things only because we are unable to view them in their energy state. As you can imagine, scientists who make their living identifying, classifying, and measuring objects in the physical world disagree. Deepak Chopra, however, warns, it is short-sighted to believe that because science today cannot explain consciousness, consciousness must lie beyond science's reach. But even if the origin of consciousness is too complex to be fully grasped by the human mind, that is not evidence that consciousness resides in a supernatural realm. In fact, though, the question of how consciousness arises remains a puzzle. We have plenty of evidence that consciousness functions according to physical law. To Chopra, even God is not necessary. All we need is a universe that contains consciousness as an inseparable aspect of itself. But if everything is consciousness, and we call this consciousness God, then God is not a separate person with identifiable attributes, as Christianity claims. The new spiritualist God is actually a little g God, a force, a principle, a vibration, light and sound, not a thinking, willing, feeling being. God is consciousness, new spiritualists say, and the better we understand consciousness, the clearer our godlikeness will be to us. Each of us has access to a supraconscious, creative, integrative, self-organizing, intuitive mind whose capabilities are apparently unlimited, said John Bradshaw. This is the part of our consciousness that constitutes our godlikeness. One new spiritualist, Ruth Montgomery, supposedly channeled a spirit that spoke through her, claiming, "We are as much God as God is part of us. If each of us is God, then together we are God. This all for one and one for all makes us the whole of God." New spirituality theologian John White states that sooner or later every human being will feel a call from the cosmos to ascend to godhood. I am God, you are God, every person is God. This is what new spirituality claims. Meher Baba declared, "This is only one question, and once you know the answer to that question, there are no more to ask." There is only one question, and once you know the answer to that question, there are no more to ask. Who am I? And to that question, there is only one answer. I am God. Shirley MacLaine, a movie actress and spiritual teacher, recommends beginning each day by affirming one's own godhood. You can use I am God or I am that I am as Christ often did, or you can extend the affirmation to fit your own needs. Today, theologians and philosophers use the word pantheism to describe this belief. Pan means all and theos means God. Pantheists believe all is God. It's an accurate description of the theology of new spirituality, as we will see in the theology chapter. Third idea is consciousness can be harnessed to achieve perfection. Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth, soared to prominence as one of Oprah Winfrey's book club recommendations. Hundreds of thousands of people bought it and recommended it to others. According to Tolle, the biblical prophecy of a new heaven and a new earth will be fulfilled as more people harness the power of consciousness. The new earth arises as more and more people discover that their main purpose in life is to bring the light of consciousness into this world and so use whatever they do as a vehicle for consciousness, he says. One popular way of describing the power of consciousness is the law of attraction. Remember that for new spirituality advocates, everything is energy. Things are energy, thoughts are energy. Good thoughts produce good energy, and bad thoughts inhibit it. As Rhonda Byrne says in The Secret, your thoughts become the things in your life, and your transmission creates your life, and it creates the world. New spirituality advocates often point to Jesus as an example of how to tap into the energy field called consciousness. As John White asserted, the Son of God is not Jesus, but our combined Christ consciousness. Jesus is looked on as the one of a select company having achieved Christ consciousness. Every person is encouraged to acquire the same level of consciousness. New spirituality sees Christ's life as important because it showed humanity how to achieve perfection, even godhood. John White states, the significance of incarnation and resurrection is not that Jesus was a human like us, but rather that we are gods like him, or at least have the potential to be. If Jesus is just an example, not a savior, then the Bible's description of his life, death, and resurrection, and indeed his entire purpose as savior, is either wrong or irrelevant. The fourth idea is that the purpose of life is overcoming self. Although secularism and new spirituality both use the term self, they mean something entirely different. To the secularists, the self, or the self-aware individual, is the basic unit of human life. To new spiritualists, from a Buddhist tradition, We must be rid of any sense of the self. The self does not exist. To new spiritualists from some Hindu traditions, the self must be lost in the universal self called Brahman in order to have meaning. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, "He who has let go of hatred, who treats all beings with kindness and compassion, who is always serene, unmoved by pain or pleasure, free of the I and mine, self-controlled, firm and patient, his whole mind is focused on me. That man is the one I love best." But how do we free ourselves from I and me, and from selfishness and ego? The answer from the perspective of new spirituality is twofold. First, people can free themselves daily and temporarily through such practices as yoga and meditation. Second, new spiritualists believe people can be free forever through reincarnation, living their lives, dying, and being reborn until they gradually become more enlightened. The Dalai Lama says the root cause of our unenlightened existence within the cycle of rebirths, samsara in Sanskrit, is said to be our fundamental ignorance, our grasping at the sense of self. Between Buddhism and Hinduism, and even within various traditions in Buddhism, there are differences in understanding and defining reincarnation. For the purpose of this chapter, it is enough to understand reincarnation as the process by which the body passes away, but the soul continues its quest for enlightenment in other forms. It can be a very confusing thing to understand, even for those who firmly believe it. The actress Shirley MacLaine, recalling the birth of her daughter, mused, "When the doctor brought her to me in the hospital bed on that afternoon in 1956, had she already lived many, many times before with other mothers? Had she in fact been one herself? Had she in fact ever been my mother? Was her 1-hour-old face housing a soul perhaps millions of years old?" An additional question MacLaine should have asked is, how would my daughter know the answer to these questions? Because if her birth was actually a rebirth and she did not know this, how could she ever live her life differently so as to move toward greater enlightenment? To answer this question, rather than believe in a God who sets the rules and judges people accordingly, believers in reincarnation place their faith in karma, which is a law of causality that says very basically good is returned to those who do good, and evil is returned to those who do evil. In each successive lifetime, then, a person must pay off his or her past karmic failings, suffering for and learning from past evils. Chief among these failings is seeing ourselves as individuals. This separates us from the consciousness of the universe. In order to understand themselves and their paths to godhood, people must be cognizant of at least some of their past lives. Gary Zukav explains, if your soul was a Roman centurion, an Indian beggar, a Mexican mother, a nomad boy, and a medieval nun, among other incarnations, for example, you will not be able to understand your proclivities or interests or ways of responding to different situations without an awareness of the experiences of those lifetimes. Reincarnation can serve little purpose unless people can know about and learn from their past lives. It is unclear, however, how, if at all, this awareness of previous lives takes place. It is also unclear how we become separated from the oneness of the universe in the first place. Unless our individual souls are somehow eternal, there must have been a first incarnation. But in this first life, there could not have been any previous lives in which to collect karmic debts. How then did we fall into individualism? New spiritualists rarely address these questions, except to suggest that we ask them because we're not sufficiently enlightened not to. In any event, the end goal of reincarnation is to be completely cleansed of karmic debt, thereby losing individuality altogether in order to melt into the stream of consciousness. In Buddhism, the word dukkha means suffering. The actual state of the final cessation of suffering is called nirvana. The Dalai Lama says our pursuit of this peaceful state of nirvana is a quest for protection from the misery of samsara. and particularly from the afflictions such as attachment and aversion that bind us within the vicious cycle of rebirths. Section 6. New Spirituality as a Worldview. As we can see so far, New Spirituality proposes answers to many of life's questions, though not necessarily coherent ones. New Spirituality proposes a theology. God is not a person but a force. A philosophy. We can gain wisdom by getting in touch with our God nature. An ethic. We can live best by avoiding those actions that would condemn us to more miserable future lives. A biology. A view of what life is, consciousness, the universal mind, and so forth. And a psychology. We can live in greater mental health if we are cleansed of ego. As we will see throughout this book, from these starting points, New Spiritualists propose what kind of society we should have, how laws should be structured, which political system is ideal, which economic system will produce wealth, how the flow of history has led us to this place, and where we should go next. As with the other worldviews we've explored, let's see if we can get a sense of New Spirituality's understanding of both general revelation, or what can be known and is obvious to all, and special revelation, or what must be specially revealed to us since it cannot be figured out. Section 7. General Revelation. Science and New Spirituality. Science is focused on observing and explaining the physical universe. Christians see the scientific method as a way of discovering God's design of the universe. Secularists view science as a means for understanding the mechanics of the natural world. New Spiritualists, however, have an odd relationship with science. In their view, science has been primarily an attempt to control nature for the benefit of human beings, and has therefore been a destructive enterprise. A proper view of science, they argue, would lead to a better understanding of consciousness and a more harmonious relationship between human beings and planet Earth. To begin with, New Spiritualists dispense with the need for a first cause, God, by claiming the universe was uncaused. As the Dalai Lama expresses it, from a Buddhist point of view, the continuum of substantial causes preceding our conception can be traced back to before the Big Bang, to when the universe was a void. Actually, if we follow the line of reasoning by which we trace our continuum back to before the Big Bang, we would have to acknowledge that there could not be a first moment to the continuum of substantial causes of any conditioned phenomenon. In other words, the universe is eternal. It has no cause or being. There is no point in looking for either. The search for a cause of nature, or the beginning of the universe, has been fruitless, say New Spiritualists, because it has proceeded from wrong assumptions. Based on a Christian conception of God, says Marilyn Ferguson, early scientists like Isaac Newton saw the universe as a finely tuned machine and hoped to finally explain everything in terms of trajectories, gravity, and force. It would close in on the final secrets of a clockwork universe. But, say New Spiritualists, the idea of a mechanistic universe failed to explain the universe as we now know it. Quantum physics stepped into the gap, though. The father of quantum theory, Max Planck, proposed that matter absorbed heat energy and emitted light energy discontinuously in energy packets, which Albert Einstein called quanta. The behavior of matter, according to quantum theory, cannot be neatly predicted or slotted into mechanistic categories. The universe is more mysterious than we imagined, and this, to New Spiritualists, affirm the power of human consciousness to shape the universe rather than merely obey its laws. As the physics professor in James Redfield's novel, The Celestine Prophecy, phrases it, the whole of Einstein's life's work was to show that what we perceive as hard matter is mostly empty space, with a pattern of energy running through it. This includes ourselves, and what quantum physics has shown is that when you break apart small aspects of this energy, The act of observation itself alters the results, as if these elementary particles are influenced by what the experimenter expects. In other words, the basic stuff of the universe at its core is looking like a kind of pure energy that is malleable to human intention and expectation in a way that defies our old mechanistic model of the universe. Humans can shape the universe? This would indeed upset the apple cart of science. With these discoveries, says Marilyn Ferguson, our understanding of nature shifted from a clockwork paradigm to an uncertainty paradigm, from the absolute to the relative. In other words, Ferguson believes the latest scientific discoveries support new spirituality beliefs. The shift to this questionable new view of science is imperative, according to new spirituality advocates, because the desire to control nature has placed our planet in deep peril. According to William Thompson, the emergence of a scientific culture stimulates the destruction of nature, of the biosphere of relationships among plants, animals, and humans that we have called nature. In 1979, scientist James Lovelock's book, Gaia, A New Look at Life on Earth, breathed life into new spirituality's fringe approach to science. Lovelock said, taken as a whole, the planet behaves not as an inanimate sphere of rock and soil, but more as a biological superorganism, a planetary body that adjusts and regulates itself. Lovelock drew the name Gaia from the ancient Greek goddess of the earth. Although he considers himself a positive agnostic and has tried to distance his theory from any religious connotations, New Spiritualists immediately promoted Lovelock's theory as scientific support for their worldview. The idea that a symbiotic global network of consciousness, which all living things in planetary systems share, departs radically from the idea that evolution occurs through random chance processes and the survival of the fittest. The Gaia hypothesis emphasizes the cooperative spirit of the entire biosphere. The Earth is not a dead habitat that happens to support life, Lovelock asserts, but a living, integrated system of soil, oceans, wind, and living things working together in harmony for the good of the whole. The Gaia hypothesis visualizes the planet as a self-regulating system, implying purpose behind it all. While this may sound like intelligent design, an idea of great interest to Christians, New Spiritualists deny an intelligent personal designer. To them, consciousness was a feature of the universe before the universe itself even existed. There is no who behind the what. Lovelock's vivid description of Gaia provided a spiritual basis for the modern ecological movement as well as the more radical offshoots of ecofeminism. That is, ecofeminism is the linking of feminism and ecology to fight male domination, which proponents say oppresses women and exploits the planet's resources. Ecofeminism and deep ecology, which is the call for the radical restructuring of society based on the idea that all living things, not just human beings, should have legal rights. Many ecologists pointing to signs of ecological imbalance say we should be paying closer attention to our Mother Earth, or Gaia. Saving the planet is more than a moral imperative. It is our destiny. How does New Spirituality answer the ultimate questions? Many have asked, how do we know our assertions about the nature of reality are actually true? But few New Spirituality teachers attempt to prove anything at all. True, some refer to quantum physics and the mysteries of the universe, but usually by way of creating room for the possibility of their beliefs as opposed to positively grounding them in truth. It is enough for many New Spiritualists that they are in touch with a higher consciousness. They believe their inner soul searching is the only proof their arguments need. In light of this, let's answer the 5 questions we focused on with each of the worldviews we've considered. 1. On what sources of revelation does New Spirituality draw? New Spirituality begins by denying the preeminence of any purported special revelation over any other. That is, new spiritualists believe the Bible is no more a word from God than the Quran or the teachings of Confucius. This is not to say they are held in equally high regard. New Age advocate David Spangler says, we can take all the scriptures and all the teachings and all the tablets and all the laws and all the marshmallows and have a jolly good bonfire and marshmallow roast, because that is all they are worth. So if there are no scriptures, what should we trust? Rhonda Burns says simply, trust the universe. Trust and believe and have faith. She continues, the truth is that the universe has been answering you all of your life, but you cannot receive the answers unless you are aware. The need is not for scripture, but for awareness. But how do we achieve this awareness? Meditation. Sometimes with crystals or mantras is often the method to use to achieve a higher consciousness. A writer in Lifetimes magazine states emphatically, my message to everyone now is to learn to meditate. It was through meditation that many other blessings came about. Another method is channeling, which refers to the controversial new spiritualist belief that disembodied spirits presumably speak to and through a gifted person engaged in meditation. These spirits, it's assumed, have greater awareness of consciousness because they are not limited by an attachment to a finite body. Alina, a spirit John Randolph Price allegedly channeled, describes beings like herself as angels of light, whether from Earth or other worlds. They search, select, and guide those men and women who may be suitable subjects. While all new spiritualists embrace meditation as an important tool for attaining higher consciousness, not all new spiritualists embrace channeling. Many new spiritualists also point to near-death or out-of-body experiences as evidence that their understanding of the true nature of reality is correct. Raymond Moody, Kenneth Ring, and Melvin Morse are among the writers who claim that such experiences not only verify the existence of consciousness beyond the grave, but more specifically the nature of spiritual experiences as described in other new spiritualist writings. Other practices new spiritualists use include astrology, firewalking, Ouija boards, crystal therapy, and aura readings. From a Christian viewpoint, these are occult practices and are condemned in Scripture. But to new spiritualists, such practices provide useful insight into the nature of consciousness. What does new spirituality say about humanity? For Gary Zukov, consciousness, not individual existence, is our ultimate nature as human beings. He says, all that is can form itself into individual droplets of consciousness. Because you are part of all that is, you have literally always been. Yet there was the instant when that individual energy current that is you was formed. Consider that the ocean is God. It has always been. Now reach in and grab a cup full of water. In that instant, the cup becomes individual, but it has always been, has it not? This is the case with your soul. There was the instant when you became a cup of energy, but it was of an immortal original being. You have always been, because what it is that you are is God or divine intelligence, but God takes on individual forms, droplets, reducing its power to small particles of individual consciousness. Eckhart Tolle affirms this view when he refers to the consciousness of the universe as presence with a capital P. All life forms, Tolle says, are temporary manifestations of the underlying one life, one consciousness. All spiritual forces are preparing the ground for a more profound shift in planetary consciousness that is destined to take place in the human species. This is the spiritual awakening that we are beginning to witness now. For new spiritualists, all knowledge exists in the godlikeness within us. If we connect with a higher consciousness, we transcend the limitations our physical existence imposes on us. Jack Underhill explained what would happen if everyone in the world were to connect with his or her godhood. They can turn off the sun and turn it back on. They can freeze oceans into ice, turn the air into gold, talk as one with no movement or sound. They can fly without wings and love without pain. pure with no more than a thought or a smile. They can make the earth go backwards or bounce up and down, crack it in half or shift it around. There is nothing they cannot do. This very high view of human potential is a consistent feature in New Spirituality writings. Rhonda Byrne says, "You are God in a physical body. You are spirit in the flesh. You are eternal life expressing itself as you. You are a cosmic being. You are all power. You are all wisdom. You are all intelligence. You are perfection. You are magnificence. You are the creator, and you are creating the creation of you on this planet." What does New Spirituality say is wrong with us? The very high view New Spiritualists have of human potential is at odds with the traditional idea of human sinfulness expressed in Romans 3:23, when it says, "All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." To Deepak Chopra, one benefit of the theory of evolution is to serve as a blow against sin, the human stain that could be atoned for but would always return. Evolution opened a way to escape the trap of sin by offering hope for progress in all aspects of life, although it took a long time for such a humane implication to strike home. Chopra's understanding of evolution is at extreme odds with the common view among scientists that evolution is mindless and material and not intentionally moving in any particular direction. But what it means scientifically does not seem to be as important to him as how useful it appears in counteracting the Christian conception of the sin nature. The real sin in New Spirituality, if there is such a thing, is failing to understand the true nature of consciousness. Eckhart Tolle says human beings have an inherited dysfunction, a collective mental illness that creates suffering. You do not become good by trying to be good, but by finding the goodness that is already within you and allowing that goodness to emerge. He says, but it can only emerge if something fundamental changes in your state of consciousness. Tolle refers to this inherited dysfunction as ego. It is a negative inner state that makes us miserable and prevents our spiritual growth from producing true health and understanding. It is possible to rid ourselves of it, Tolle writes. To end the misery that has afflicted the human condition for thousands of years, you have to start with yourself and take responsibility for your inner state at any given moment. That means now. Ask yourself, is there negativity in me at this moment? But if the individual's problem is negativity, and if society's problem is also negativity, how might society change? New Spirituality advocates say we need mass consciousness. Beverly Gallian says, once we begin to see that we are all God, that we all have the attributes of God, then I think the whole purpose of human life is to re-own the godlikeness within us, the perfect love, the perfect wisdom, the perfect understanding, the perfect intelligence. And when we do that, we create back to that essential oneness, which is consciousness. Robert Mueller says only the unity of all can bring the well-being of all. The founder of Transcendental Meditation, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, believed in gathering large groups for meditation for the purpose of decreasing violent crime, warfare, and terrorism. His followers call it the Maharishi effect, or super radiance. What does New Spirituality say about how we should live? The ideas of consciousness and godlikeness radically change how people live. As we saw in the Bhagavad Gita, and as is common in New Spiritualist writings, indifference to suffering is the basis of a good life. Love and compassion actually make the problem worse. They bind us to pain and suffering, prolonging negativity, individualism, and ego. In contrast, Christianity teaches that we are obligated to help people in need. Proverbs 24 says, rescue those who are being taken away to death. Hold back those who are stumbling to the slaughter. If you say, behold, we did not know this, does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who keeps watch over your soul know it? And will he not repay man according to his work? James 4 affirms, whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. The law of karma, though, produces a very different response from the biblical injunction. If a person's misery helps cleanse him or her of negative karma, should we help alleviate his or her suffering? Wouldn't this stop short the cleansing process? The traditional Hindu resistance to interfering with someone else's karma kept Hindus from helping the sick or improving the lives of the downtrodden. Jesus, on the other hand, illustrated the idea of loving one's neighbor through the parable of the Good Samaritan, and he even denied that sin is the sole cause of sickness. Combined with a vision of human beings as God's image bearers, these beliefs led Christians to show compassion for the sick, the poor, and the needy. These biblical teachings are in part what pricked the conscience of the revered Mahatma Gandhi, a Hindu and a humanitarian who was concerned with the needs of the poor. Gandhi said it was Christian missionaries, not fellow Hindus, who awakened in him a revulsion for the caste system and for the maltreatment of outcasts. He acted inconsistently with his Hindu presuppositions and instead incorporated a biblical system of ethics. According to New Spirituality, then, if something is wrong, it is because you will it so. If you're sick, it is because you want to be sick. If you're poor, it's because you want to be poor. If you get in an accident, it is because you wanted to be hurt. The way forward is to rid yourself of negativity, individualism, and ego. Rhonda Byrne states it emphatically: you cannot catch anything unless you think you can, and thinking you can is inviting it to you with your thought. Aloofness to the human plight, not compassion or salvation, is the New Spiritualist approach. How are we to understand other worldviews based on New Spirituality? New Spiritualists teach that all religions are alike in what really matters. This wishful thinking is popular today. Perhaps you've heard, we're really all saying the same thing. What is all the fighting about? Many people are unaware that in expressing this belief, they have been influenced by the compelling work of professor and writer Joseph Campbell, who rose to popularity through a film series and a book entitled The Power of Myth. In The Hero with 1,000 Faces, Campbell discussed the monomyth cycle of the hero's journey, a pattern he claims found in many cultures. The monomyth involves the hero receiving a call to adventure and passing threshold guardians, often with the aid of a wise mentor or a spirit guide, before entering a dreamlike world. There, after a series of trials, the hero achieves the object of his quest, often an atonement with the Father, a sacred marriage, or an apotheosis, elevation to divine status. He then returns home. For Campbell, almost all hero myths, religious and secular, throughout history and across cultures, contained at least a subset of these patterns. Thus, all religions told the same story. As you can imagine, Campbell's work has been profoundly influential in Hollywood among those who want to tap into filmgoers' deep beliefs in order to give the stories true staying power. Still, despite the commitment to radical pluralism, New Spiritualists can be quite critical of religion, especially those beliefs that focus on sin and salvation. Any such approach is utopian, according to Eckhart Tolle, and it just makes the problem worse. At the core of all utopian visions lies one of the main structural dysfunctions of the old consciousness, looking to the future for salvation. The only existence the future actually has is as a thought form in your mind. So when you look to the future for salvation, you are unconsciously looking to your own mind for salvation. You are trapped in form, and that is ego. In the end, in spite of its attempts at transcending differences in order to pursue mass consciousness, New Spirituality does try to argue the shortcomings of other worldviews. We've already covered New Spirituality's criticism of Christianity's emphasis on sin and salvation. What are its criticisms of other worldviews? Well, according to the Bhagavad Gita, secularism is demonic. One refrain addresses it specifically. They say that life is an accident caused by sexual desire, that the universe has no moral order, no truth, no God. Clinging to this stupid belief, drawn into cruelty and malice, they become lost souls and at last enemies of the whole world. driven by insatiable lust, drunk on the arrogance of power, hypocritical, deluded, their actions foul with self-seeking, tormented by a vast anxiety that continues until their death, convinced that the gratification of desire is life's sole aim. Bound by 100 shackles of hope, enslaved by their greed, they squander their time dishonestly piling up mountains of wealth. As you might expect, the people who believe in consciousness as ultimate reality reject the idea that the human brain is, in the words of artificial intelligence pioneer Marvin Minsky, just a computer that happens to be made out of meat. Deepak Chopra considers such blatant secularism to be no better than the religious systems he rejects. I am less concerned with attacks on God than I am with a far more insidious danger, the superstition of materialism. He is right to be concerned if, as the secularist claims, materialism, you remember, it's the idea that only matter exists, and naturalism, the idea that everything has a natural explanation, are correct, then new spirituality is untrue by definition. As we discussed earlier, Eckhart Tolle sees humans as cursed with an inherited dysfunction, a collective mental illness that creates suffering. When people try to change the world without first changing their state of consciousness, it always ends in disaster. The history of communism, originally inspired by noble ideas, clearly illustrates what happens when people attempt to change external reality, create a new earth without any prior change in their inner reality, their state of consciousness. They make plans without taking into account the blueprint for dysfunction that every human being carries within, the ego. Utopian visions will always fail, according to new spirituality, if they attempt to succeed by changing physical structures. Remember, new spirituality's ultimate reality is consciousness. Ignore this, and you'll be wrong about everything else. Although new spiritualities claim to be aloof to both pain and pleasure, some spiritual teachers cannot help but notice that very old cultures, such as Islam, seem to thrive by inflicting pain on others. Tolle's explanation for this is as follows. Because of the human tendency to perpetuate old emotion, almost everyone carries in his or her energy field an accumulation of old emotional pain, which I call the pain body. Tolle says, in some nations, for example in the Middle East, the collective pain body is so acute that a significant part of the population finds itself forced to act it out in an endless and insane cycle of perpetration and retribution through which the pain body renews itself continuously. Until Islam releases its need to be right, to proclaim absolute truth, and to attempt to cause others to fall in line with its presuppositions, new spiritualists think it will be part of the problem rather than part of the solution. Some new spiritualists committed to finding the common core in all religions turn to a 12th century Islamic teacher named Averroes, also called Ibn Rushd, whose teachings are carried on today in the writing and speaking of the followers of Sufism, a mystical cult of Islam. But such thinking is confined to a tiny percentage of Muslims, and the Muslim community at large generally disdains its adherents. Conclusion. New spirituality is an identifiable pattern of ideas, beliefs, values, and convictions. Despite new spirituality's shaky science, unwillingness to provide evidence for its claims, indifference to the human condition, and often muddled and insubstantial basis for belief, tens of millions of people in America and hundreds of millions around the world embrace this worldview and its answers to life's ultimate questions. New spirituality can be found all around us, in movies and music, on television, in our neighborhoods, and in our schools. Although it stands in direct contrast with the Christian worldview in many ways, new spirituality catches many Christians off guard through its constant references to God and Jesus Christ as a teacher of consciousness and an example of what we all have the potential to become. Christianity, in contrast, is not about needing a teacher or example. It is about our need as sinners guilty before God for a Savior. The Gospel of John records a conversation in which Jesus told his disciples, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Confused, one of Jesus' disciples, Philip, replied, Lord, show us the Father. In response, Jesus said, Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these will he do, because I am going to the Father. Whatever you ask in my name, this I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. Only when we acknowledge Jesus as Savior will we find our true calling as ambassadors of truth, grace, love, and compassion in a hurting world. The end. And there's kind of the sunset.